why you always fall back into the same patterns. You rehearse escape, then report back to your warden on time. The body already knows the route. The slight tightening at the base of the throat when possibility opens. The microshiver that announces a tension you didn't request. The weight that drops into the gut like a small animal curling to sleep. You call it prudence. You call it timing. You call it being thoughtful. What you actually do is run your finger along the old groove and let gravity decide. You do not decide. You narrate decisions that have already been made for you by a script older than your memory and closer than your skin. Watch the sequence. You feel the lift of an opening, a split-second airless space where something unapproved might happen. Your shoulders rise half a centimeter. Your eyes scan for the referee you imagine lives in every room, and the performance begins. The smile that isn't about joy but about permission. The careful phrasing calibrated to dodge a flinch. The full-bodied attentiveness toward the highest status figure in reach. Even when you disguise it as respect, you mistake this reflex for intelligence. It's diligence by the condemned, not discernment by the free. Your breath becomes shallow when silence stretches. Silence is an accusation in your world. You fill it with explanations in the voice of the defendant. You think you're making a case, but you're just playing your part. Even alone, you rehearse hearings that never happen. You organize your actions as if a panel will review them. You call it conscience when it is stage fright without an audience. You think your caution speaks of care. It speaks of surveillance you internalized and then renamed. You were split. One part steps forward towards the thing you claim you want. Another part drags you back by the collar and mutters a mathematics of risk that always arrives at the same negative total. You will deny it. You will point to exceptions. 2 moments you did more, spoke up, crossed a line. But notice the pattern of your victories. Permitted, bounded, reversible. You break only what you're sure can be repaired without consequence. You practice rebellion on soft surfaces. Consider your posture around power. Your neck angles down a degree when a certain kind of voice enters your jokes contract. Your laugh shifts to a safe register. You become highly attuned to microsignals, proud of your accuracy in reading the room. You call it social intelligence. It's preemptive obedience. This is not insight. It's survival theater. You were cast without consent and never declined the role. You've forgotten there was a casting call at all. You argue that you're strategic, that you choose your moments. You keep saying later, which is simply a neutral word for never, that doesn't alarm you. You keep saying when it makes sense, which is a placeholder for when I can't be harmed, which is a fairy tale you've dressed in adult language. You keep saying you have standards. Your standards are a fence. One you sit on and call it integrity, while your legs go numb, and you mistake numbness for patience. Your body detects threshold and enforces return. That is the system, whether you tell yourself otherwise or not. The deeper truth is mechanical. When pressure rises, you obey. When a gaze fixes, you shrink. When someone lower threatens comfort, you are expansive. When someone higher threatens evaluation, you become careful. You negotiate not for outcomes, but for leniency. You wear good behavior like armor and wonder why you can't run in it. You fetishize complexity because it lets you stall inside thoughts. You create an architecture of analysis so dense that it becomes a labyrinth that leads back to the entrance. You admire your own maps. You call it depth. It is a detour with a thesis attached. You feel safer being the most articulate prisoner than the quiet free one. You think clarity is a weapon. For you, clarity is a spotlight. You avoid it and swear you're just waiting for the right angle of light. Every time you approach the scene where your life might change, you experience a subtle nausea. You translate it into ethics, into being considerate, into prudently waiting for the right conditions. You prefer to be acceptable. Acceptable is your metric. Acceptable is your leash. You would rather be unthreatening than alive. You insist this is wisdom. It is sedation. This is why you answer to anyone who speaks in the tone you fear. This is why you confuse politeness for safety and choose it over movement. Notice how you behave when no one is looking. You still negotiate with an invisible witness. You still justify, soften, smooth. You rehearse lines for a future interaction that will never occur. The mere idea of judgment is enough to shape you. You are trained by a presence that doesn't need to exist anymore to govern you. You maintain its authority out of superstition you call caution. You defend your stability by calling it care for others. You hate the idea of being called selfish, so you break your own back and then perform empathy. It is not empathy. It is bribery. You want to be spared. You want a stamp that reads good in red ink. You keep showing your receipt to anyone who might have a stamp. You never ask why you need a stamp to leave the store you built. You make a spectacle of being responsible. Responsibility is your brand of virtue. It is also your camouflage. You never admit that your carefulness is fear in a tailored suit. You prefer authority to tell you no rather than face what happens if no one can. You are terrified that if restraints are removed, you will be exposed as empty or monstrous or ordinary. So you write rules and pretend the rules were always there. You become your own bailiff and clap yourself in irons while saying this is for your own good. You have an audience even when there is no audience. You perform credible misery. You narrate struggle in exact terms to earn leniency from an imagined judge. You provide context. You offer reasons. You preempt criticism with confession. You confuse confession with truth. It is simply a way to control the story. You fear consequences, so you volunteer a smaller punishment and call it honesty. Listen to the lie you protect. You tell yourself you are reasonable. Reasonable is the word you use when you want to avoid the heat that comes with being undeniable. You disown urgency by citing consequences. You take refuge in perspective to avoid personal cost. You talk about balance, not because you have it, but because balance hides your inertia. The words you respect most are the ones that let you hide in plain sight. This is not about trauma. This is about habit turned into identity and defended as morality. You chronically choose the mechanism that humiliates you by degrees because it ensures no sharp pain. You accept the long ache over the clean wound. You call it resilience. It is an allergy to rupture. You would rather return to the slow squeeze you know than risk the air you can't predict. You are not unlucky. You are compliant. And you are compliant not for peace, but for permission. You are most alive when you almost do it and then don't. The almost is your drug. The drop after the almost is your proof of being good. You're addicted to that decline because it reassures you. You are still the type who knows their place. This is why you sabotage, not because you hate yourself, because you love the feeling of returning to the known after flirting with the forbidden. The expected sigh, the familiar weight, the repeatable sorrow. It's a loop that caresses. You talk about pressure as if it lives outside you. It doesn't. It resides in the posture you inhabit. You position yourself as one being evaluated. You climb onto scales willingly. You volunteer for judgment and then complain about the balance. You seek contexts where you can be measured because you know how to perform for those measures. You avoid wild fields. They have no referee. You prefer corridors. Your eyes land faster on faces than on horizons. You'd rather be approved by a person than claimed by a path. You translate vision into social terms because social terms provide levers you understand. Charm, compliance, deference, delay. Vision is indifferent. It does not clap. It does not frown. That emptiness terrifies you. So you choose rooms over roads. You've learned to be interesting enough to be kept, but not threatening enough to be watched. That's your equilibrium. Flirt with edge. Retreat under praise. Offer difficult truths softly so they are seen as nuance rather than challenge. Invent burdens that can be solved with diligence rather than risks that require a death. You insulate your reputation. You protect the version of you that survives in other minds. You will let your own time evaporate to keep that phantom clean. Pretend you don't know what I mean, but your body already answered. Your jaw tight when I said you rehearse hearings. Your chest cold when I called your empathy a bribe. Your tongue dry when I named your standards offense. You felt accused not because these words are unfair, but because they are accurate enough to irritate the places you never touch. The places that dictate your calendar, the tone of your messages, the relief in your evenings when you've successfully postponed the thing again. You curate your own disappointment. You like it a little. It proves loyalty. It says you didn't step out of line. It says the part of you that wants more didn't win. You confuse discipline with refusal. You confuse politeness with goodness. You confuse small sacrifices with dignity. You are practiced at bowing disguised as thinking. You do not think. You anticipate. You keep perfect form. There is no mystery here. There is an arrangement. You play the defendant. You imagine authority. You perform for an observer. You return to permitted ranges. You call this stability. It is captivity with pretty language. You can translate the bars into any vocabulary you prefer. They do not dissolve. If you continue, your own alibi will confess you. You developed a structure that keeps your world breathable, and you forgot it was a structure. You were once hemmed in by forces you could not oppose, so you learned the angles. You learned how to dial your presence down when heat rose, how to make yourself legible to the right eyes, harmless to the ones that mattered, endlessly useful to everyone who could sanction you. You built casing around yourself and called it character. Over time, casing became skeleton. The behaviors that delivered temporary safety became the way you define being a good person. You confused survival arts with morality. Now you defend the cage like an heirloom. The role repeats because it pays you consistently. You don't risk for victory. You bargain for relief. Relief is a dependable wage. Relief from blame. Relief from envy. Relief from rejection. Relief from the panic of unsupervised choice. That is the true cost you avoid. Actual choice. Decisions that can't be rationalized as inevitable require a spine you refuse to locate. So you keep seeking reasons that absolve you from authorship. Busy with obligations, saddled with care, constrained by context, you remain a subordinate in your own life. It feels safer because it is familiar. The payments arrive on schedule. Muted gratitude from others. Admiration for your reliability. A safe seat in the middle. You deposit each small praise like proof that you are not the problem. Meanwhile, the interest compounds in a currency you pretend isn't real. A dull heaviness under the sternum. A stale taste in your mouth when you repeat the script. A private disgust that surfaces only when the light is off. The lie is simple. You say you're shielding others from your appetite. You frame denial as generosity. But your denial isn't for them, it's for you. You can bear deprivation. You can't bear open exposure. Appetite exposes. It would show you where you've been false. It would threaten the persona that keeps you socially solvent. You've built friendships and reputations around being safe, predictable, unthreatening. You are proud of being the one others can count on not to unsettle the hierarchy. That pride is a disguise for fear. Fear that if you let yourself become irreversible, you would have no one to appeal to, so you keep yourself reversible. That is the core of your structure. Everything must be undoable. Every move must be deniable as a misunderstanding. You trade the irreversibility of action for the reversibility of respectability. The structure beneath your behavior is made of substitutions. You substitute articulation for consequence. You substitute service for sovereignty. You substitute complexity for risk. You substitute apologies for decisions. The substitutions stack into identity, and identity then demands obedience to maintain continuity. You have become a steward of the past version of you, not because you love them, but because you are terrified of breaking the chain that grants you a history others recognize. You defend continuity to avoid isolation. You put the weight of coherence above the cost of decay. You keep replaying a courtroom drama. There is a judge you both fear and try to please. There is a jury you imagine as the generalized public. There is a prosecutor you outsource to every authority figure you interact with. There is a defense attorney who speaks in your head, enumerating mitigating factors, building context around every failure, highlighting the good intentions, emphasizing the pressures. You keep returning to that courtroom because it provides a clear script, performables with predictable outcomes. Speak here, sit here, show remorse, present documentation, a ritual that guarantees you will leave chastened but intact. In that world, novelty is a risk to be stamped out by process. You always leave out the one figure that would end the trial, the one who refuses the frame. That figure terrifies you because it would render all your skill irrelevant. You have built a diet of deferral. You chew on later until it tastes like maturity. You store possibilities in labeled jars and call that stewardship. The jars are dusted, catalogued, occasionally admired. They never open. You perform the adult supervisory role over your own hungers, and then expect a gratitude that never arrives. Of course it doesn't. You are not saving anyone. You are keeping yourself inside a hallway where every door is known and every step is accounted for. Your consequence is not failure. It is not an event. A dullness so constant you call it peace. You maintain this loop by corrupting language in your favor. You rename fear as analysis. You rename self-protection as care. You rename reluctance as wisdom. You rename surrender as acceptance. You present your recalibrations as humane, but the cost leaks through your body regardless. Your sleep is shallow. Your future sketches remain abstract. Your recall is foggy around the months where you might have moved. Your anecdotes circle the same season. You can list your responsibilities with perfect recall but struggle to name a single decision that cannot be walked back. You live in a reversible world and refuse to call it counterfeit. There is a moment you refuse to remember, and it repeats with uncanny fidelity. The instant after you've said you will, right before you won't. Your spine cools. Your peripheral vision widens. Your awareness of others intensifies. Suddenly you feel the social web like a net. You pull your hand back. You apologize in advance. You ask for more context. You put on the tone of a conscientious citizen prepared to deliberate. And then you deliver the same conclusion, prudence. Every time, you believe you had no other choice because the web felt real. You never question why you are so sensitive to tension in the web. Because your status there is the only place you breathe without choking. Your role is the careful one, the checker, the stabilizer, the exploitable. You inhabit the second seat even when no one occupies the first. You attach yourself to causes, to projects, to people with a higher voltage, and then you become their regulator. It gives you proximity to heat without requiring ignition. You tell yourself you prevent disasters. You actually prevent yourself. The pattern is dignified by your rhetoric. but it is blueprinted by your thirst for safe nearness. You might say you prefer influence to spotlight. Truth, you prefer guaranteed relevance to the possibility of being unforgettable. Unforgettable requires risk of being unlikable by the wrong faces, or being loved outside the metrics you know how to control. You decline those economies. You choose the ledger you can audit. Power, when it brushes you, appears as emptiness. A silence that doesn't respond when you perform. A withdrawal that doesn't punish or praise. A refusal to play the parts. You feel it like a void and rush to fill it with your customary offerings. Apology, context, promises. It remains indifferent. You panic. You choose a room where your offerings are still legal tender. You go back to the court. At least there, someone stamps your papers. At least there, sorrow is recognized and processed. You think recognition is the same as relief. It's not. It's just the comfort of being seen suffering in the correct posture. Everything you call identity is packed with bargains. You agreed early to be acceptable in exchange for survival. You continued the deal long after survival required it. You keep your edges filed down and your movements annotated because the annotations are more real to you than the movements. You want a record of having tried more than you want the cost of having done. The past as a witness is more important than the future as a landscape. You place more faith in proof than in breath. You're not confused. You're complicit with your own inertia. It's refined, practiced, and justified. A system this efficient doesn't collapse from insight. It continues until depletion makes compliance impractical. You aren't avoiding a dragon. You're avoiding a blank page. Dragons are easy to fight because there's a script for heroism. A blank page offers no audience, no applause, no enemy to defeat. There is nothing to narrate, only an act that reorders you. That is intolerable to the you who lives to be narrated. The cost is not in the story. It's in the marrow. Your joints ache on days you could have moved because you didn't. You treat the ache as age. It's not. It's friction between the body's desire to carry weight and the mind's insistence on carrying credentials. Your tongue curdles when you say yes to the same deferrals, because you hear yourself lying and you are the only one who listens every time. You wake with a hangover after nights of perfect behavior. The hangover is not alcohol. It's accumulation of almosts. You don't need a villain. You need a judge who won't dismiss. So you keep finding rooms where the judge can be pleased. You turn your life into exhibit after exhibit. You curate evidence of goodness. You require witnesses. You require signatures. And you wonder why conclusions never land. Conclusions never land because your life is a case that must never close. Closure would force you to inhabit a verdict written by you, which would end the courtroom and erase the person you've built to be tried. That loss feels like death, so you keep the case open. You keep the motions filing. You pretend this is movement. It is paperwork. This is not a lecture. It is a reading of the architecture you defend. The steel is visible. The reversibility doctrine, the courtroom frame, the identity built from substitutions, the refusal of irreversibility, the worship of relief. Your behaviors are not random. They are perfectly consistent with a single design principle. Avoid becoming the one who cannot appeal. Every time you get close, you find a way to restore the right to appeal. You call it humility. It's jurisdictional. You will deny this until you are alone later, and your body informs you it has been understood. You will feel the same pressure in your chest that you feel at thresholds. You will try to translate it into insight to diffuse it. Insight will not help because nothing here demanded intellect. It demanded a willingness to stop playing the defendant. You will resist this because the defendant is the only character that makes sense of your losses. Without it, there is no moral accounting to explain your life. There would just be the record of what you didn't do. That is the one document you refuse to file. You think you are the one trapped in a pattern. You're not. You are the instrument that plays it. You keep yourself in tune for the same song because silence scares you more than repetition. This is why you go back. It's not failure. It's loyalty to a role that keeps you spared from authorship. It is your shield against being unreviewable. The structure stands because you stand inside it and describe it as weather. You are not waiting. You are maintaining. You invest daily to keep the loop smooth. You defer. You apologize in the correct tone. You over-explain. You observe rank faithfully. You translate risk into rationale. You curate reversibility. You sit in the second chair even when the first is empty. You keep the courtroom open. The pattern does not pull you back. You lean into it, because outside the loop, there is nothing to measure you against. No witness to your goodness. No stamp. No paperwork. No leniency to beg for. No permission to be alive. That absence is the only thing you refuse. You didn't slip. You were consistent.